Welcome to the fourth and final installment of Greater Lafayette Commerce's 2023 Quarterly Development Series, Economic Forecast. We'd first like to acknowledge our sponsors whose support made this event possible. We are grateful to partner with them to develop programming that offers insights into exciting business and community developments right here in Greater Lafayette. Please hold your applause until the end. Thank you to our stage sponsor, Duke Energy. And thank you to our series sponsors, APL Cargo, Centier Bank, City Bus, DeFow Automotive, First Farmers Bank and Trust, First Merchants Bank, Franciscan Health, Goot Wine Law, Henry Ott Group, Horizon Bank, Huth Thompson, HWC Engineering, IU Health Arnett, Ivy Tech, Kettle Hut Construction, Kirby Risk, Magolian Brew Vendor, Old National Bank, Purdue Federal Credit Union, Purdue University, SAW, Security Federal Savings Bank, Star Associates, State Bank, T-Bird Design, Tippecanoe Building and Construction Trades Council, Tenant Blank Construction, Unity Healthcare, Valley Oaks, and Wintech. Thank you again for your continued support of Greater Lafayette Commerce and our programming. Let's give our sponsors a round of applause.
Let's also give our professional voice talent a round of applause. Shelby Light. She's so much better than I am. Thank you, Shelby. My name is Scott Walker. I'm with Greater Lafayette Commerce, and I want to welcome you all here today for the fourth installment of our quarterly development series, our economic forecast luncheon. As you know, it's one of the most treasured events that we do because we have such great talent here because of Purdue University. And so you're going to hear some insight from our economists with us today. I'd first like to recognize our elected officials that are here with us today. We have from the City of Lafayette, Mayor Tony Rosworski. Also from the City of Lafayette, we have our City Clerk, Cindy Murray. From Tippecanoe County, we have our County Commissioner, Tom Murtaugh. We also have Jody Hamilton from the Tippecanoe County Council. And we have our County Sheriff, Bob Goldsmith. From the Lafayette City Council, we have Steve Snyder. And I know I saw Mark Dowd here with Senator Braun's office. Mark? Thank you for coming. So with that, it's now my pleasure to introduce Tim Newton, Director of External Relations and Communications for the Daniels School of Business at Purdue University. In addition to his duties at the Daniels School, Tim is also the play-by-play announcer for Purdue football and women's basketball on the Weirfield Purdue Sports Network. So I'll go ahead and turn it right over to Tim.
Thank you, Scott. It's always a pleasure for us to come across the river and share some of our campus expertise with this very important audience. I think we're all anxious to hear what our speakers have to say next. It is Halloween. Do you get a trick today about the economy, or do you get a treat? We're about to find out. Our first speaker has shared his expertise at this event many times. He came to Purdue in 2007 in the economics department. He was promoted to associate professor in 2014 and a full professor earlier this year. He serves as the Kozic Director of the Purdue University Research Center in Economics, also known as PERS. He teaches courses in applied econometrics at the undergraduate, master's, and doctoral levels, and he focuses his research on public policies in areas including education, taxation, and labor market regulation. Would you please welcome Professor Kevin Mumford.
Thanks, it's wonderful to be here with you today. Okay, I'm going to start, as I have in the past few years, by showing you the number of deaths in the United States. Now, it's just a real positive way to start a talk, you know? So, the key here is that the number of deaths is just way down from what it was during the pandemic period. And you can see the natural cycles up and down, right? So the peak, each time as you see those peaks, every time that's January. And then you see a little dip, that's February, and it's not a decrease in the number of deaths because something special about February, there's just fewer days in February. And then there's a little uptick again in March. January, February, March are always elevated for numbers of deaths in the US. And you see that pattern year after year. During the pandemic, it all breaks down. The pattern's gone, everything's up. There's just a lot more deaths in the United States. But we've had, nearly, not quite yet, but almost 2 years since we've been back into the regular cycle. We're out of that pandemic period, we just don't have the same deaths. And you can even see that this last winter, it returned to something that looked much closer to normal. Okay, so I'm going to be using this pink color to show you the pandemic period. This is not the NBER's recession indicator. This is just when we're in that elevated death period on each of the future charts. So next is GDP. The pandemic caused a massive drop in GDP, but it's back. In fact, it's all the way back to potential GDP. The economy is at full potential today. The recovery was rapid, and my take is that this economy is about as strong as it's been. The unemployment rate is back down to pre-pandemic levels. It's been sustained there now for 18 months. This is 3.5% about average unemployment. That is about as low as it gets. And so still looking very, very strong. Labor productivity had a big spike during the pandemic. So this always happens during recessions. And during the pandemic, the same thing happens. Everybody's just sort of asked to cover for the person that's gone, right? So you had someone leave or you had someone out, and you're just doing 2 jobs sometimes. So productivity goes up it really went up during the pandemic, you can see it. It's dropped back down. We're kind of back to trend again. It's a lower trend than we were on 2 decades ago. The past decade, productivity growth in the US has been somewhat lower. We're going back to that trend, maybe a little bit above that trend, but we'll see. Productivity growth is super important because productivity growth drives wage increases. And so when productivity growth is strong, wage increases are larger. The savings rate is back down to pre-pandemic levels, maybe even lower. So during the pandemic, we all saved a lot more. One of the reasons we saved so much money during the pandemic is because there was nothing to buy. Everything was closed. You couldn't go out to eat. So everybody was saving their money. Well, those days are gone. Everybody's spending their money today. The savings rate is as low as it has been in the past 50 years. All of that federal subsidy happening during the pandemic, all of those checks that we received, that cost the federal government a lot of money, and that shows up in government borrowing. So this is the borrowing held by the public, so federal debt held by the public, and all that means is I'm not counting the federal debt that's held by other agencies of the government. This is the debt that's held by anybody outside of the government. That could be you and I, it could be the pension funds, it could be foreign governments. That debt spiked at about 100% of GDP during the pandemic, and it's actually been declining. But that's not because the federal government's borrowing less, it's because I'm measuring it as a fraction of GDP. And GDP recovery has been very strong, and as GDP has gone up, it makes it look like that debt as a fraction of GDP is going down. Really, we're borrowing at a very strong, there's a very rapid increase in the amount of federal borrowing going on. And you can see we're at very high levels. I'm going to show you the inflation graph without really describing it much, because Dean Bullard is here and I'm sure he'll have something to say about inflation. But you can just see in the pre-pandemic period, we were about 2% all the time. And then during the pandemic, at the end of it, inflation spikes, hits a peak of around 7%. And since it's come down to what is around 3.5, I suppose today, 3.5 is much better than when it was 7, but it's not where the Fed wants it at 2%. The last time I came last year, I talked about this big gap between the number of workers we would have expected to have in the labor force and the number that we actually had. And it was a large national gap. We were talking about millions of workers that were missing from the labor force, causing very, very tight labor market conditions. It gave the workers a big advantage. It made it very difficult for employers to get the help they needed. That's mostly gone. So the labor market, the total civilian labor force is back at trend. Today there's zero gap. We're back to where we thought we would be. That means the labor market should not feel as tight as it did a year ago. That said, in Indiana, there is still a bit of a gap. So we haven't quite gotten back to our trend in Indiana, but it's a small gap. 2 years ago, the gap was more than 100,000 workers. Last year, it was 50, 60,000 workers. It's less than half that today. There's still a gap in where we thought we would be in terms of participation, the people that have joined the labor force, but it's not nearly as tight as it was a year ago. And maybe the best place to see this is in the number of job openings that have been posted. So that's the gray line at the top. Postings are down. There's not as many openings as there were a year ago, as there were 2 years ago. Hires are down. There's not as many workers being hired each month as there were last year. And I think most important, quits, that's the line in black at the bottom, quits are going down. Now, they're still at a relatively high level. I like quits the best here because a quit tells you how confident a worker feels that they're going to be able to get a new job when they voluntarily leave. This is not someone being fired, this is somebody quitting their job. And you don't quit your job if you're feeling like the labor market's not too good for you. So it's trending down. That means the labor market is weakening, but it's still at a fairly high level from what we're used to, which means that this is still a tight-ish labor market, even if it's trending towards weakening. Okay, so that's the summary of where we're at. And every time I come to talk with you, I just pick one thing to tell you about. Last time when I was here, I talked about U.S. immigration policy. Time before that, we talked about the way the government was responding to the pandemic with various programs. We've talked about what causes economic growth. Today, I want to talk to you about one of the most important things going on in Indiana today. And what I want to talk to you about is the college-going rate. So, some stylized facts to remember. First of all, in the United States, about 3 million people will graduate from high school each year. So you get 3 million new high school graduates each year. About 2 million of those will go directly, immediately to college. Some sort of higher education, 2-year, 4-year, or some sort of training school that is eligible for federal aid. So about 2 million of them are going on to higher education. Of those, half will graduate with a 4-year degree. So 1 million of them, 6 years later, will have a 4-year college degree. That's kind of the thing to keep in your mind, is about 2/3 of high school graduates go to college. About half of those will end up graduating with a 4-year degree. The good news over the past few years is that completion rates are increasing. So this stylized fact that I've kept in my mind for the past 10 years, it's starting to look a little better. It's not 50% graduating, it's now almost 60% are graduating. Colleges and universities are doing a better job of getting the students to their degree than they were in the past. So that's good news. Bad news, the number of students choosing to go to college is declining. Maybe you don't all think that's bad news, but I do, and I want to tell you why I think it's bad. And it's not just because I'm a college professor. There's other reasons I think it's bad news. Okay, so in Indiana, just kind of a frame of reference, 70,000 students graduate from high school each year in Indiana. This is the fraction of students that graduate from high school that go, so of the students that graduate from high school, this is the fraction that choose to go directly to a 2-year, 4-year, or some sort of higher education. In Indiana, 10 years ago, it was 66%. We were right at that fact that I've had in my mind, that stylized fact. And the United States as a whole was also right at that exact same level. And since then, in Indiana, that college going rate has plummeted. I mean, it really picks up around 2015, 2016, and it just starts declining. Today, 53%. 53% of high school graduates are choosing to go to some sort of higher education. It's true it's a national trend. It's declining in the US as a whole, but it's declining more in Indiana than in other places on average. Now, where is it affecting? Which institutions? So it's not happening at Purdue. Purdue enrollment is higher than ever. So if you say, of the Indiana high school graduates, how many of them are choosing to go to Purdue? Well, the answer is about 26% more than in 2012. So setting 2012 at 0, 26% more high school graduates from Indiana are going to Purdue than in the past. That's just because Purdue is accepting more students, and so of course they're accepting more Indiana students as well. IU is having no trouble keeping up with this. So there's been a big overall decline, and IU's numbers are also up a little bit. A little bit more Indiana students than before. So the drop must be somewhere. Where is it? It's at the regional universities and it's at the community colleges. Massive declines in numbers of students. So I'm talking Indiana State, that's on the picture, but you're talking regional schools like Ball State and so on. The community colleges, they're all way down. Students are not choosing to go there anymore. So just keep that in your mind. What's causing the decline? Well, one of the main things I've heard from people is that the pandemic accelerated this trend. A lot of people are blaming the pandemic for this effect. I think it's unfair to blame the pandemic too much for this because the trend had started before the pandemic began. 2016, 2017, 2018, we're seeing rapid declines. Maybe the pandemic accelerated that a little bit, but it's not the root cause. I think one of the main root causes is that the labor market is so strong. There's great opportunities for young workers to make money. So I'll show you that on the next slide. The one other point I want to bring up is that the perceived return to a college degree has really dropped. Not the real return, but the perceived return. So I'm going to show you a little bit of evidence about that. Okay, youth labor force participation, I mean, it's up a little. If you look from 2012, the number of 16 to 24-year-olds that are choosing to work, to be part of the labor market, to be working instead of going to school or doing full-time training, it's been increasing. And I think that's because when you have a strong, healthy labor market, the opportunity cost of school is higher, they've got good opportunities, so that is some of this story. And as the labor market weakens, we may see some of that turn around on its own. If that was the whole story, I wouldn't be as worried. The real reason I'm worried here is there's been a substantial decline in this perceived return to college. So when the Pew Research Foundation asks, does college have a positive effect on the way things are done, the way things are going in our country? It used to be that about 2/3 of people said, yes, colleges are good for the country. If you look at people who identify, well, let's do the total line first. There's been a total drop, but the big drop is those that identify as Republican or conservative. It goes from 2/3 down to down to 1/3, basically, saying that college is worthwhile. I mean, that's a challenge, right? There are big gaps. This survey was done by 538, one of these statistics websites. I go to them anytime I'm picking my bracket for the NCAA. On the question, college education is the best way to get ahead in the US, it's dropped, but there's a big gap between blue and red states, where people in red states like Indiana think that college is much less the best way to get ahead nowadays. College makes you lose common sense. if you're from a red state, you're more likely to agree with that statement, that college makes you lose common sense. So I think this is the reason Indiana is facing more than most other states, is that there's been this argument that college just isn't worth it today. But the evidence is the opposite. So when you look at the average college wage premium, when you look at wages that college graduates earn, I mean, they're at an all-time high relative to the wages that the high school graduate would earn without going to college. So that college wage premium, the gap between college wage and high school wage, it's as high as it's ever been. So it's not that there's been a decline in that, it's that people think there's been a decline. The Nobel Prize in Economics just this year was awarded to Claudia Goldin. And this is not what she won the prize for, but one of the things that she's most known for is some work with another economist named Larry Katz on the race between education and technology. And what they found was that technological change has been very skill biased. And what that means is that from starting about 1980, as companies and as industries have adopted new technologies, it's tended to increase the demand for college-educated workers. So as the company put in some new robot or some new automated process, they also wanted to hire a college graduate to monitor, to work with that particular new technology. And that's the kind of skill-biased technological change they're talking about. It increases the demand to hire these college-educated workers. So luckily, during all this time, there's been a massive increase in the number of college-educated workers. But what they showed is that in the race between how many people are getting a college education, how quickly we are adopting the new technology, technology has been winning. The technology has been advancing more rapidly than the pace at which we're educating the workers. And that means that the wages for college-educated workers are going up and up and up. And they found that about 75% of the total increase in inequality is due to the college wage premium going up. It's because colleges aren't putting out enough college graduates, and it's driving up that wage premium, causing inequality. One update to that finding in a recent paper they put out shows that today it's not that it's all about this college wage premium, it's actually about within college, it's about the difference between the majors. So there's been a massive ramp up in wages for engineering, computer science, people with quantitative skills. And that gap explains a lot more of the inequality over the past 20 years. In a very, very simple model, if you think about the demand curve for college-educated workers, you've got a supply curve, you've got the wage, and then the quantity hired. If we were to increase the number of students being educated with a college degree, that would drive down wages for college-educated workers, which is exactly what everybody that's trying to reduce inequality wants. It's also what the employers want. The employers want to be able to hire people without having to pay so much. If we were to rapidly increase the amount of college education, that would help inequality, it would help employers, it would boost productivity. I mean, this is one of the best policies a government can engage in. And here the decline is mostly just about perceptions. It's not that the Purdue degree is not worth it anymore. In fact, the evidence shows that our graduates are earning more than ever, even in real terms, earning more than ever. The degree is super valuable. But the message just doesn't seem to be getting out there. So let me conclude with just sort of two slides. So first slide, what is the state doing about it right now? So just in this past legislative session, the state decided to auto-enroll people into 21st century scholars. This is the low-income Pace for College program in our state. That's great because auto-enroll will help a lot. About half the people eligible weren't enrolling. This should help. They already had required that all juniors take the SAT. That should help because maybe you're a junior that wasn't really planning to go to college. Now you took the SAT at high school and you did it for free and you got a great score, and then you think to yourself, you know what? Maybe this is an option. This is an opportunity for me. Starting this year, high school seniors are going to be required to take or complete the FAFSA. That's the financial aid form, which honestly is a nightmare, but that's the thing that you put in to Yeah, that's what you fill out to be able to see if you qualify for financial aid. I mean, a lot of students in Indiana were not filling it out. They didn't realize how affordable a college education would be for them. In fact, in many instances, the student would pay nothing. But they just don't know it maybe because they didn't fill out the form. So now that's going to be a required part of high school. What more could we do? So I just refereed this paper that I was super impressed with. It was an experiment in Michigan that has just been run, where what they did is they took, in the senior year, they took a portion of all seniors' English classes during the fall semester. And instead of just having them read Irish poetry and write about it, they had them write their college essays. They had them learn about what it means to go to college. They had them do some career exploration and write about that, write about different careers. They had them explore how financial aid works. They had them write about what kind of majors are interesting to them and what kinds of majors lead to what kinds of careers. When you do all of that stuff with all of your students, what they found was this intervention, and it was a randomized controlled trial. They did it in 62 different high schools. 31 of them were treated, 31 of them were not. It was primarily disadvantaged high schools, rural high schools for the most part. When they did the intervention, it dramatically increased the college-going rate. Just by giving them the information, it was a very inexpensive way to go about this, and it had the advantage of correcting some of those misperceptions. I thought one thing also very interesting about it was that it also changed the sorting of who went to college. It convinced some students that they shouldn't go to college, that what would be the best fit for them was to do a trade school. And just giving the information, helping students sort better, would also help us increase our graduation rates. Okay, so in the end, this is really important because I worry about the future of the state if we're not educating the same ratio of students as we were in the past. How are you going to attract all those high-tech businesses to come here if we don't have the labor market to support their business? So let me conclude with that, and thanks so much for your time.
Thanks, Kevin. Kevin will come back at the end here. We'll have a question and answer session, but we want to get to our next speaker. He came to the Daniel School earlier this year after serving for 15 years as President and Chief Executive Officer of the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis. He was the longest-serving Fed Bank president in the country and is considered to be one of the most influential economists, not just in the country, but in the world. He regularly appears in national and international media. Most recently, he was on Fox News last week with Neil Cavuto. He now serves as the Dr. Samuel R. Allen Dean of the Daniel School of Business. Would you please join me in welcoming Jim Bullard?
Thank you, Tim, and thanks to everyone for being here today. Happy Halloween. I was just looking at that question that Kevin had on the list up there. It was roughly, was college education good for you or bad for you or something like that. It reminds me of a story about Leo Tolstoy, 19th century Russian author. Tolstoy owned big fields and had serfs and stuff. And so Tolstoy died, and then all these people were at the funeral, and one of the people at the funeral asked one of the serfs, "What did you learn from Leo Tolstoy?" And he said, "Book learning drives you crazy." So, I don't know, maybe Tolstoy was a little nutty. Great to be here, and I thought what I'd do is just talk about the economy a little bit the way I see it, and we'll do most of this by Q&A. So get your questions ready, and I'm happy to talk about anything Kevin talked about, or anything else you want to talk about. But I'll just give you a general overview of where we are with the U.S. economy. The Open Market Committee of the Federal Reserve is meeting today. So if I hadn't come here to the eve of the new DSB, I would have been at that meeting. So they're deciding, they're making their interest rate decision today. It looks like, according to markets anyway, that they'll remain on hold at this meeting. So the biggest issue continues to be inflation. And inflation, as you guys know, is disturbingly high still in the U.S. economy, and it's eroding a lot of our wages, and we wish it would go away. I'll just say it's not my fault. In 2022, I was a leader in really getting an aggressive central bank policy to try to bring inflation down, which I do think has been moderately successful so far, which I'll describe here. But a lot of people ask me, gee, Jim, where did all the inflation come from? And I think the answer to this, and Kevin alluded to this, is that it's a combination of all the spending around the pandemic combined with the central bank wanting to be on board and have low interest rates at the same time. So that's kind of the same thing that would occur during a war. Finance is often associated with inflation. So the society faces a crisis. Parliament or the Congress goes off and spends a lot of money without really asking too much about how this is going to be paid for later on. The interest rate guys, the central bank is asked to keep interest rates low to help with the war effort. That group of events usually leads to a lot of inflation, and in fact, that's exactly what happened this time. So at the peak, we had CPI inflation on a year-over-year basis over 9%. We had numbers that were close to or above what we had in 1980. So the highest inflation in 40 years. And so that was bad. And the committee really had to spring into action during 2022, which we did. And I was very pleased during the first half of 2022, we were able to get the quantitative easing program stopped and reversed. We were able to get the committee to move off of the near zero interest rates and start going up. Then we had 4 75 basis point increases in a row, kind of unheard of in the world of central banking. And we brought a lot of the other foreign central banks along with us. So I think this has been moderately successful. The year-over-year CPI inflation rate today is just a little over 3%. So if you just take that metric, was over 9%, now just a little over 3%, so down 6 percentage points on the inflation rate. Still not down to 2%, but a lot of improvement. And I think if the committee stays at it, we'll be able to get back to 2% relatively rapidly here, and this inflation episode will be behind us without doing too much damage to the U.S. economy. So let's keep our fingers crossed that it all works, and we'll be able to get rid of the inflation here. Now, more near term, the concerns have been that resolve will wane in the second half of 2023 here, where we are now, and that inflation, instead of continuing to come down, will stall out or will start to go back up a little bit. And there's a reason for that, that people think that that might happen, and it's basically that the U.S. economy has been very resilient in the second half of 2023 here, and because of that, possibly the disinflation will go quit, and inflation will start to come up again. So what do we mean strong economy in the second half here? Well, the GDP number we got for the third quarter was really strong, pretty much across the board. We had the last jobs report that came in very strong, way ahead of what Wall Street thought, plus revisions to previous months. If you add all of that together, it was over 400,000 jobs added in that month, including the revisions. Then you had retail sales coming in super strong. Then you had just today employment cost index hotter than expected. So a lot of things happened during the third quarter that, you know, it's one thing to have a strong quarter, okay, it's kind of, and there's a lot of randomness in the data, but Wall Street was predicting a negative quarter for for the U.S. It kind of shows you where forecasts are. That's why I'm not giving you forecasts. Wall Street was predicting a negative third quarter, and not only was it not negative or not even ordinary, it was like extraordinary. So way off, predictions were way off for the third quarter, and I think the general tone of financial markets has been that just a misreading, I would say, of the economy pretty much the whole time since the pandemic, and they've had a hard time. Let's say, a lot of forecasts that have not panned out, and especially on inflation, really missing the mark in key ways. So hopefully the policy will bring us back to 2% inflation, and then I would say gradually interest rates would fall after that happens, but not until that happens, because you have to maintain some credibility as you're trying to get inflation to come down. Let me just talk about the labor market, and Kevin touched on this for a little bit, but it continues to be an exceptionally strong labor market in the U.S., and I'd be anxious to hear what this group has to say. You've still got 2 job openings for every unemployed worker. You've still got an unemployment rate that's 3.8%. I mean, most of my life, that was not the unemployment rate. The unemployment rate was somewhere in the 4s or the 5s, or the 6s, or higher than that. So you've got extraordinarily low unemployment rates. I think you've still got, when I talk to businesses anyway, their major challenge is retaining workers, trying to make sure somebody doesn't quit and go across the street, for $1 more, trying to keep everybody happy. I think this is still the major challenge, is to get high-quality workers at the price and keep them on board. So I think we've still got a very strong labor market, let's just put it that way. So I think the fact that the labor market doesn't seem to be slowing down at all, GDP seems to be quite strong, inflation seems to be coming down, and hopefully if the committee stays at it, will continue to come down. That sounds like a soft landing, and I have been an advocate that there could be a soft landing in the U.S. economy, so let's hope that, so I'm the anti-Halloween guy, I'm not trying to scare you here, I guess. So then I'll just finish up and talk a little bit about the international situation, because there's a lot going on there. So we've got 2 wars going on, one in Ukraine and one in Gaza. I would say Wall Street is cautiously optimistic about the U.S. economy, even given that those are going on. If they stay at the level that they're at now, those conflicts, then I think Wall Street thinks that the U.S. economy can power through and do very well. As always, when geopolitics raises its ugly head, things could get worse very rapidly. You can wake up tomorrow morning and something has happened. But if things stay where they are for now, I think U.S. corporates, U.S. equities, and the U.S. economy generally would be able to do pretty well. So I think even though it's an unnerving situation internationally, right now I don't see that feeding back to the U.S. economy. You've got a somewhat slower European economy and a somewhat slower Chinese economy. Sometimes that feeds back to the U.S. and would affect some of you here that are trying to export to those places. But generally speaking, I think that despite all the headlines, that economically speaking, we're okay globally. Noting that there are risks out there that can deteriorate very quickly. So let me not drone on too long here and see if we can get some Q&A going. And I'm happy to talk about issues that you want to talk about or that Kevin talked about. So maybe just open it up for a few questions here and just see where you're at. Oh, sorry. There's a mic coming. He's got the toughest job. I can hear you. Yeah.
So, just really quickly, when you mentioned that if they stay at it, 50%, you say stay at it, you raise rates or keep it?
Yeah, I'm going to quote Alan Greenspan on this. I think I'm on the record as being vague on this. So the question was, do I mean that the Fed will have to keep raising rates, or do I mean that the Fed will have to keep rates where they are? As it stands right now, the committee has another rate hike penciled in by the end of this year. So if that was going to occur, it would occur at probably the next meeting, which would be in December. I think the committee will continue to watch the data with respect to that decision. They don't have to make that decision right now, so why not just wait for the data to come in and see where we're at. But the data so far this fall has come in really strong, as I've been saying. Also the inflation, some of the inflation numbers have come in stronger than expected. So if we get more of those kinds of numbers, that would increase the probability that they would move in December. I would say in the big picture, policy rate was near zero, now is over 5%, so that's a long ways in interest rate world. And so, somewhere in this vicinity is probably the right place to be to try to get inflation to continue to come down. So I think as long as you get the disinflation continuing, I think the committee might be comfortable staying where they are going into next year. If that turns around, though, you get this hot economy, now this puts upward pressure on inflation, all of a sudden, it doesn't look like inflation's coming down so much. That would be the scenario that I think Wall Street would have a lot of trouble with, and all of you would have a lot of trouble with, because the committee would have to get back into the game and would have to start raising rates again, and that would be upsetting for everybody. So.
From Leadership Lafayette, and my question is about, you referenced the importance of other countries' central banks. Africa has traditionally had volatility in many countries there, South America as well. Currently, Argentina is in a dire crisis with inflation upwards of 140%. The current president is not popular. The libertarian candidate running is wanting to dismantle the central bank. How do you think we should help encourage other economies throughout the world to remain strong with their central banks?
Now that I'm out of central banking, dismantling central banks doesn't bother me. I guess let me start with the first part of the question. So when I think of the world internationally, and you listen to me talk about it, I'm always referring to a European economy, which is kind of on the same scale as the U.S. economy, and China. China's up at about 20% of world GDP. There would be other Asian countries, especially Japan, but others. It's really those three regions of the world that are the power centers for global macroeconomics. Other countries are out there, and I love other countries, but they're small. And so when I'm thinking global macro, I'm thinking those three main areas. Latin America, unfortunately, is continuing to lag, and Argentina especially has had many problems for many years. Another place is Turkey, super high inflation. So what? I don't know if you want. You shouldn't start me on this. Basically, there was a revolution in central banking called inflation targeting. All the countries did it. All their inflation rates came down. They started to hit their inflation targets. Much better situation than in the 70s. And so it was a big success. A couple countries tried to buck the trend. Argentina is one of them, Venezuela is another one, Turkey is another one, and they said, oh, we don't have to do it that way or whatever. And they end up with 100% inflation rates, ridiculous situations, and I just have no sympathy for the whole thing. This has been solved, and they could solve it too, but they have to reform their the way they handle their monetary policy. dual mandate. Yeah, you guys are tough. According to the existing U.S. law, it's a good thing. You should do this in all legislation. Congress sets some goals. Here's the goal of this institution. Boom, 1, 2, 3. And there's actually 3 parts to the goal. One is price stability. One is a stable economy or maximum employment. And the last one is moderate long-term interest. I think it's moderate long-term interest rates. So no one pays any attention to the last one. They only pay attention to the first 2, and that's called the dual mandate. You'd like to manage the interest rate decision in such a way that you keep inflation low and stable, which has been codified as a 2% inflation rate. And at the same time, you want to be cognizant of the feedback to the real economy, and so you want to try to keep employment as stable as you can, and growing and stable. And if you're doing both of those 2 things, you end up on the cover of Time magazine. So I think Europe supposedly does not have a dual mandate. They have a single mandate. But my experience is that European monetary policy is conducted in essentially the same way as an American monetary policy. So it's as if they have a dual mandate. One of the things that has happened in Europe just recently is that some of their real economic indicators, especially in Germany, have not been as good. And this has caused the ECB to be a little more dovish than they otherwise would have been. And so that shows that they're also reacting to news on the real economy, not just on inflation. I have been a proponent, however, of having a single mandate for the U.S. because the only thing that central banks can do in the medium term is control the inflation rate. So because of that, I think it would clarify in everybody's head that this is the only thing that monetary policy can actually achieve. We can't solve all the other problems in the world by moving interest rates around. The only thing that we can do is control the inflation rate over the medium term. So in that sense, it might be useful because it would be a more accurate statement of medium-term possibilities for monetary policy. A lot of people turn to the central bank and want the central bank to solve all kinds of other problems in the world, which are better solved by other agencies or by Congress itself.
We can open up for questions for Kevin Mumford as well. If there are any questions, okay.
This might be a question for both of you anyways, but what type of economic effect do you see happening with college repayments starting in October? And
With what?
With college loan repayments, and if you see that having an effect on U.S. buying power?
You have an answer for this?
Probably not as good as yours. I have to go first.
So she's referring to the pause on student loan repayment. Student loan repayments have been on pause since the pandemic and have just restarted. And so there's going to be a lot of people who now they're having to find room in their budget to make those student loan payments, and they weren't doing that in the past, and that should cause a decrease in spending, and we haven't seen that in the data yet. So far it hasn't shown up. I just want to make maybe a short point on this, which is you read these stories about massive student loan debt. You read a story about someone that has $250,000 of student loan debt, and they're struggling to make those payments. That person did not get that debt from an undergraduate university. That was not their four-year undergraduate degree. The federal borrowing cap at a four-year college for your undergraduate degree is about $30,000. That's the most student debt that person could have. So someone that has a massive student loan balance, that means they did several master's degrees. They were getting an art history degree at Columbia, and that's very expensive, right? So the kinds of people that the student loan pause had a really big benefit for those that had very large balances, and it's not the traditional student. There are not actually that many of them.
Yeah, when I've looked at this data too, it's very skewed out and it has this long tail. So most people that owe something owe much less than what you see in the headlines. Then it goes way out on the tail, and you have a few people out in the tail that owe a lot. Yeah. So very interesting.
I had a question about the workforce slides and who's going to college and not going to college. A lot of the jobs that are in this market are in manufacturing, and they require increasingly higher levels of skills, which is often represented by credentialing, or could be associate's degrees, but most often it's credentials and technical certifications. Are we seeing a decline in those, an achievement of those as well? Do you know how that plays into the higher education trends?
Yeah, so is it a change in the degree mix?
So anything that any institution that can receive federal funding is counted in that higher education number. So this includes things that maybe you weren't thinking of, like if you go to cosmetology school, that's included as higher education. But if you're doing a short-term credentialing program, particularly if this is an employer-sponsored program, it's not being counted in that higher education. And we have seen an uptick in those kinds of jobs. And so that may make you less nervous than me. You may be thinking to yourself, well, to the extent that this is students going into manufacturing and getting some credentials, maybe it's not such a bad deal that they're not going to college. But my worry is about the long term here. So the job market is hot today, but will all of those current jobs still be here in 5 years or during the next downturn? And during the pandemic, during the recession before that, the jobs that were the most stable were the high educated jobs. Those are the ones that survived those downturns really, really well. And I worry about the state being able to attract the kinds of manufacturing firms that it wants to attract if it doesn't have the college educated workforce ready to go.
I'm worried about being put out of work, by ChatGPT in about 3 weeks.
That brings up my question. What's the potential for artificial intelligence to create an increase in productivity as we look at adaptation and to mitigate the shortage of college-educated employables?
This is yours. Well, you wrote papers on this.
I love the artificial intelligence trend. I would say it's an extension of long-term trends about automation and productivity enhancing technological change. So this always creates angst, as it has for at least the last 200 years. I'm not surprised that this wave is also causing angst. But in the long term, I think it would be better. There'll be things that we can do that would be, we used to have to do manually. I think one simple application, in my mind anyway, is maps. It used to be that you had the map that you carried with you, and you had to page through the map and all of that. Now Google gives you directions no matter where you want to go. So I think that's that sort of assistance that you'll get through artificial intelligence. They're slapping a new name on it, artificial intelligence, but I think it's a continuation of long-running trends in automation. They also want to sell more computing services, so I think that's a huge factor. Microsoft in particular.
Any other questions for our economists today?
Thank you.
Let's give them a round of applause. Thanks very much. Let's give Tim Newton a round of applause too for helping us get this arranged today. So I thank you for coming today. And just want to highlight a couple of events we have coming up this weekend. On Friday, not the weekend, we have our Rise and Shine event, 7:30 a.m. at River City Community Center. So please join us for that. It's always a great time. You'll meet somebody you didn't know, and you'll learn something about the community that you did not know about. Our annual celebration is Wednesday, November 15th. That's 5:30 p.m. at the Tippecanoe County Fairgrounds. Join us and 500 other community members for that event. And then we are also accepting Christmas parade applications for December 2nd parade. So if you were a parade entrant in years past and we know who you are, you need to get your application in. We appreciate your support. It is Indiana's longest parade. No one can disprove that. So thank you all for coming out today, and we appreciate your support. Have a good one.